So in this video we're going to go over how to find the inverse of a linear function. So for inverses, all we want to remember is that if we have a function f of x that has an input of x and an output of y, then the inverse function is going to be a function of y, and it's going to take the old outputs, the y values, and it's going to use them as its inputs. And it's going to generate the old x values, the old outputs, or the old range, and it's going to, so the old domain, and it's going to generate that as the new range. So you'll input y, output x. So we'll start with the function f of x, and we wind up with a function f inverse of y. It's a function of y. A lot of textbooks will tell you to switch the x and the y variables and then solve for y. I do not want you to do that. I think it breeds serious misconceptions when students switch variables. And when we're working with contextual problems, we can't switch variables when we're finding the inverse. So do not switch variables. If you were taught how to do it in high school, I don't care. Don't do it. Do not switch the variables and then solve. So find the inverse f of x equals 3/2 x minus 7/5. So to make our life simpler, we're working with a function. So let's recognize that y and f of x are synonyms in this context, and let's just write y equals 3/2 x minus 7/5. And then to find the inverse function, all we need to do is solve for x, so that y is the input and x is the output. So I start by adding 7/5 to both sides. Y plus 7/5 equals 3/2 of an x. And then we multiply both sides by 2/3, because when we multiply by a reciprocal, we get 1. And whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. So 2/3, the reciprocal of 3/2, 2/3 times 3/2 equals 1. 1 times x is just 1x, and we have 2/3 of y plus 7/5. And I've just found the inverse function. X is now the output, and the y variable is now the input, which is the hallmark of an inverse function. In fact, I could replace the x at this point with f inverse of y. In the same way that we could replace up here f of x with y, the x can be replaced with the inverse name. We get inverse y, output is f inverse of y, and input x is the same as f of x.